Yeah, I really enjoy the work you're doing. I found you on Instagram, and you just have
Mhm.
those very simple diagrams, of the feet, what they look like. It's like the old, this is your brain. This is your brain on drugs, but it's like, this is your feet. This is your feet on shoes, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. Well, I'm glad you like it. We try and make it as simple as possible for people to understand, keeping in mind the attention span of most people on social media. You have to make it as simple as possible to reach out to the masses. But we try and keep it as accurate as possible, which is difficult as well because there's so many different types of feet and foot issues and nuances surrounding that. So it's a challenge, but we're doing our best to keep it simple, informative, and visually impactful for people to understand.
Yeah. Well, I think it's working. I mean, you seem to have a good amount of followers too on Instagram. Is that been growing steadily?
Yeah, it's been growing steadily. All of it has been organic. We've never done kind of any paid marketing. It's just really been through consistent output of high quality information, images, mainly thanks to my colleague, Joseph Stone, who is the co founder of My Foot Function. So he's the one managing the social media account, and we come together to kind of provide as good education out there as we can through that media.
Welcome back to Radical Health. We have a great guest today. We're talking about feet, and we have Gourgen with us from My Foot Function. How are you today, Gourgen?
Thank you, Seth. I'm doing very well. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me, and I'm excited to dive deep into the conversation about foot health and function.
Yeah, it's very important, and I think it's very overlooked in our culture. Foot health. This is not just for athletes and runners, right? We all use our feet. We all stand and walk on our foundation. And if you think about some of the most important structural aspects of a house or any device or machine, the foundation is very important. And it appears that we've been led astray and kind of human feet are becoming deformed.
Hmm.
This is extremely important to me, and it's like I said earlier, it's a bit overlooked. So let's dive deep into it. I'm really curious. When was the first time you became aware of foot health, or that shoes might be hurting our feet? Like, what got you onto this study?
Yeah, so that'll take me back quite a few years. I think it was about 14, 15 years ago now. So my background's in sports science. I specialize in biomechanics, and my sports background's in Olympic weightlifting. So I used to compete in that. I did my sports science degree, and shortly after that, through several injuries, I had to kind of put that career to a side. And then I started working as a teacher in different schools that would educate personal trainers, lecturing in biomechanics, physiology, anatomy, etc. And at that point, I was completely oblivious as well, because through my sports science degree, I didn't learn much about foot health and function and how shoes impact this, apart from just the general kind of anatomy and physiology of the foot. It was not until my colleague Joseph Stone had invited a guy named Lee Saxby, who's from United Kingdom, who has a similar education background to me, is also a sports scientist and expert in biomechanics, and he's been working with this for quite a long time, and very early on realized the importance of foot function and health. So he educated the kind of the teachers in this school, including me, myself, and my colleague, within kind of running technique and foot function and health. And me and my colleague were kind of taken aback. We were like, "Wow, why haven't we been taught this before? Why isn't this being taught?" At large through different health and fitness educations, including in the rehabilitation industry, healthcare industry, etc. So through, first of all, kind of a personal journey in recovering our foot health and function, because I had developing was developing a bunion on my left foot, and was my feet were starting to collapse because, as you probably know, those Olympic weightlifting shoes and the regular shoes I'd wear on a regular basis were too narrow. So I was developing a lot of these common issues that a lot of people would have, and was completely oblivious to this, and was also taught, like many other people, that, oh, well, you need orthotics, and did use orthotics for some time as well, and kind of supportive shoes, but that never really did help up until I was educated in this and I started to exercise my feet and implement other strategies and functional tools to improve my foot health and function. And through this, I saw a massive impact in a relatively short amount of time. Now, I was fortunate enough to start with this when I was relatively young, but I saw a rapid improvement in not only my foot health, but also symptoms of back pain and stiffness and knee, etc. So I took further educations within this field, and we started, me and my colleague Joseph Stone, we founded, back then we were called Born to Run, and this was Lee Saxby's education, which we started to hold around the Scandic countries, so Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark. And it grew quite rapidly, and we quickly realized that, wow, a lot of people are actually seeking an alternative approach to what dominates kind of foot pathology treatment today, in terms where there's, just orthotics and shoes that are recommended, no form of exercise as a treatment. So we started to see an influx of a lot of people coming to us, both, regular people seeking help, but also professionals keen to learn more and how they can help their clients better. And then the pandemic hit, and then we fortunately then had already started to grow the Instagram page, and realized that, okay, we need to develop an online workshop to reach out to more people. Cut a long story short, we started to slowly develop this, and naturally, just because there was not a lot of information back then on Instagram either in this field, we grew quite rapidly. So over the 5-6 years, which my Foot Function Instagram page has been active, we went from 0 to about over 300,000 followers now, and have about 20,000 people enrolled in our courses, including close to 300 people that are educated through our certification program, so professionals that are physiotherapists and the like, to implement the methodology that we teach in improving foot health and function.
All right. Thank you for laying that out. So you came from a very practical standpoint, no pun intended, as a weightlifter, and you were developing bunions yourself. Now, I went over this in my previous show on feet, and bunions, just for anyone who's not caught up, bunion is a deformation of the foot where the phalanges start to point toward each other, right? And the metatarsals kind of move apart from each other, and it creates a bump at the side of the foot. Now, according to foothealthfacts.org, which is the official consumer website of the American College of Foot and Ankle Surgeons, bunions are most often caused by an inherited faulty mechanical structure of the foot. So they blame genetics, and they basically say, oh, there's nothing. They do say that tight shoes make it worse, but only for those who have inherited a faulty mechanical structure of the foot. So is this true, or is there a deeper reason behind people getting bunions?
Our belief is that there is a truth to it, but that so you can have genetic predispositions, we believe, that lead to developing bunions a lot sooner and a lot easier than other people. And these genetic predispositions are hypermobility, for one. So where your joints are very mobile, which means that if you put that foot or body part that's very mobile, easily movable, into a restrictive space, it's not going to be very hard to cause deformities, as opposed to someone who has more developed or rigid joints. The other factor, genetic predisposition, is that you're perhaps born with very wide feet, as opposed to other people in your society, which means that you're going to be predisposed to developing them a lot sooner because of the shoes available out there. Now, there's a lot of research done into the epidemiology of bunions, and there's a lot of research done on genetics that play a role. So, and in these studies, they do show that there is that genetics do play a role. And I think the reason why they say that is the primary factor is because that is what is told in a lot of these studies. But then when we dig deeper into these studies, none of them have actually looked at the shoes that these people were wearing. which would raise which would raise my eyebrows, because we know that shoes obviously do have a big impact. That's the number two impact they state themselves. So you'd think, okay, maybe we should investigate this deeper and see whether is it genetics that is the primary cause, or is it a cofactor, and the primary cause being shoes, which is what we believe to be the case. And this is why we went out on our own kind of research endeavor, which we may speak about soon, I believe, to look deeper into this, because there's no other studies until we done looking at the shoes and how they affect foot morphology in the same ethnic group. There's been a few studies done on different ethnic groups, but none until we did on the same ethnic group.
Okay, that's very interesting what you said about there being truth to this inherited mechanical function of the foot, because I think I was born with very wide feet. I have extremely wide feet, and I never liked wearing shoes. I never liked shopping for shoes. There are certain brands I just have never been able to wear because they're too narrow. And so I've developed more of a tailor's bunion, which also known as a bunionette, which is sort of the bunion on the pinky side, the pinky toe side. So now I'm on a mission to reverse that. I want perfect foot health, right? And so that's why I like your work. I'm learning about it. Might take some of the courses, because it seems like you might not be able to reverse a bunion just by going barefoot. So that's one of my questions is like, if you just stop wearing shoes, will you regain optimal foot function, or do you have to do these more pointed exercises and really strengthen the muscles around the bones to right this deformation?
I'm very glad you asked that question, Seth, because it's a very important and relevant one. And I think this is where there's a lot of misconceptions and ugly truths within the kind of barefoot community. I think there's part of the barefoot community that are these kind of barefoot evangelists, I call them. You go barefoot, Mother Nature will heal you, and everything will be okay. But we know through experience and working with thousands of people globally that this is not the case. Because when you have developed a bunion to a certain degree, and this applies for other foot pathologies and deformities as well, when it's come to a certain degree, just going barefoot may actually cause more problems than solve. So, for example, if we're speaking about bunions and that big toe has deviated quite a lot towards that second toe, that the first one of the first consequences of this is that it becomes harder for your body to control what we call pronation. So that is the motion where the foot is rolling inwards, and this is where also is related to hip internal rotation. So as you first take a step onto the ground, your hip will internally rotate, your foot will roll inwards, and this is an attempt of the body to absorb the impact forces. Now, that if that big toe is not into position to decelerate those forces and take you out of pronation, what tends to happen is people start to overpronate. People will tend to also externally rotate the feet, so the foot will kind of point outwards. And now when you start walking with that kind of biomechanics, even barefoot, because the way the ground reacts towards the toe, with that toe and foot in that relative position, that's actually going to push that toe into a further bunion development. So unless you correct the faulty biomechanics, and unless you correct the position of the big toe and the strength of the big toe and the muscles that will actively pull that big toe out, it may actually get worse than better. And this applies for a lot of other pathologies and deformities that we see, where things such as one thing is exercises is a very powerful tool, and then there's other tools that are very useful, such as toe spacers, for example, or toe separators, or even kinesiology tape is very useful in helping stabilize the toe joints and the toes in a better alignment to encourage more better force distribution through the toes, essentially.
Okay, that's good to hear. That's kind of what I thought, because when I discovered I had misalignment in my toes and my feet, I said, all right, I'm ditching the shoes. I'm going to go barefoot, see what happens. And while initially I think I saw a little bit wider splay, I felt more comfortable, I don't see this tailor's bunion reversing, and I think I definitely need to do more exercises and potentially involve some tools, some equipment to help, right?
Hmm.
So you made me think of a couple questions. I'm going to ask you about exercise and equipment, but first I want to know, because you alluded to your body compensating and inwardly rotating the hip, to distribute the force better. Like, what are some other complications or pains that can manifest above the feet, above the ankles, because you have a deformed foot structure?
Um, Also, a very good question, because from my experience, a lot of the times, faulty mechanics at the foot usually or more often manifest themselves at the knee, hips, or lower back rather than the foot and ankle itself. And it can be the reverse as well, but many times it manifests higher up the chain. So one thing, for example, is when we have this excessive amount of pronation or inwards rolling of the foot, inability to control the internal rotation of the hip, one of the things that start to suffer is the knee. The knee is a hinge joint, meaning that it's only made to move in one plane of motion, what we call the sagittal plane, back and forth. So imagine, a door has hinges, it just moves back and forth. The knee is essentially the same. So it does take an amount of, it can rotate slightly as well, very minimally, to be able to support the internal, external rotation going on the hip and the foot. But the knee is mainly made to be stable, the sagittal plane. So when we have an excessive amount of that motion going on, it's very hard for the knee to cope with those forces. So what is very common is having knee pain, either at the inner part of the knee or the outer part of the knee or the front of the knee, even inside the knee. So a lot of overload issues or overload injuries at the knee are a big cofactor is the foot, right? Because we know a lot of injuries, it's seldom one factor associated to it, because you can have completely deformed feet, but if you're not very active on your feet and you're not doing any activities, you're always going to have a lower risk of injury. But as soon as you do, and you start to put load through the body and it's not able to cope with those loads, then this is where we see a higher risk of injury. And then you have the hips as well, where they compensate for the inability of the foot to control pronation or supination, where the hip muscles tend to get very tight, causing both hip issues, lower back issues, because we have fascia traveling from, the gluteal muscles, the buttock, through to the lower back and even down to the knees. So it's a cascading effect of issues really that lead from foot deformities.
And you just outlined a couple of the most common ailments and injuries that people have, and men always complain of lower back issues and hip tightness, right? But women are not exempt from this either. In fact, they sometimes have some of the worst foot deformities because the women's shoes are so tight and small, and then they also have the heel, the high heels. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't even know that most sneakers, men's sneakers, have a shoe drop, like a higher
Yeah.
lift underneath the heel than underneath the toe. That causes hip,
Mm-hmm.
compensation and spinal issues, and I'm sure it can manifest up to the shoulders, neck, cause
Mm-hmm.
headaches and things like that too. So this is a very serious issue. People think health, mostly they go to diet, sleep, stress, sunlight, basic stuff. Very important, obviously, but this foot health, I think, is such an untapped world of conversation, of
Mm-hmm.
necessity. I think there's a need in our society to talk about this. So I really do appreciate your time here and your insight. Going back to the equipment, well, first, let me preface this by asking, can bunions be reversed? Like, if someone has a bunion and they got that point sticking out the side of their foot, do they have hope? Can they reverse it?
So let me answer this in two parts. The first part will be, okay, what does research say, right? And then I'll say also what my experience says through working with people with, you know, the whole range of severity from very mild to very severe. So the current research shows that mild to moderate degrees of bunions can be very effectively solved through the use of toe separators or spacers and exercises over a 12-month period. Um, and from my experience, I know that even certain severe cases can be solved, or at least to the point where that person doesn't have any symptoms or it's not holding them back from doing most of the activities. Now, in very severe cases where you have, that first metatarsal, so the bone that leads to the big toe sticking out excessively, and then that big toe diverted towards that second toe, what happens then is that essentially that joint is dislocated. When that happens, even through exercise, it's very difficult to realign that toe when it's dislocated, and it has been for a very long time, because the ligaments get stretched out into that position, which are very hard to stiffen up again. And biomechanically, the insertion to an origin of the muscles that will help pull that toe back out have been so stretched apart that it's very hard to regain that function. And usually at these degrees, which is mostly common in people that are above their 40s, 50s, usually 60s and above, it's usually associated with other issues like arthritis or osteoarthritis, which makes it even more difficult. So in these cases where these less invasive or non-invasive interventions such as exercises and toe separators don't work, or don't work all the way, then surgery may be an option. And I would only really recommend that if you are suffering from symptoms which hold you back from enjoying your life. So surgery does have a positive impact. There are, of course, there's risks associated to this. Now, there's different types of bunion surgeries, but it can definitely have a positive impact for a lot of people. But where, again, it goes very wrong is that the recommendations following the surgery are often insufficient and ill-advised. So one thing is the shoes that are recommended. Well, a lot of podiatrists will say, have wider shoes. But the problem in how we define and measure wider shoes today is also misconceived, because the width is usually measured where the toe joints are rather than at the toes. But in a natural healthy foot, the widest point of the foot should be the toes. So they're still too narrow. And then there's no recommendations in terms of how you or what kind of exercises you can implement to make sure you don't get bunions again, because a vast majority of the people that have a bunionectomy or other types of bunion surgery redevelop their bunions because they go back to the same habits and the lifestyle that you used to doing before. But if you have a very severe case and then post-surgery, you combine toe separators, you do your exercises, then you can have very good outcomes there as well. So I would say from my experience, with working from mild to severe cases, most cases are solvable. Whether you go down the surgery route or not, all cases must be approached before and or after with toe separators and exercises as well, but not only looking at how the foot functions and foot morphology, but also looking at gait mechanics, because how the hips function will also impact how the foot is steered, and in effect impact your bunion development as well.
Right on. You just said gait mechanics, and this is a word a lot of people don't know. It's GAIT. It's sort of the pattern of walking and the shape of your walking. And it's so fun. It's not funny. It's kind of sad actually that we forgot how to walk. We forgot how to stand. We forgot how to wear shoes. And we'll talk about shoes, but you also mentioned toe separators a few times. If someone were to get one piece of equipment, whether it's like a roller ball or a tape or toe separators, what do you think the best piece of equipment is, and why do you like toe separators?
It depends on the person, but if I generalize, I think toe spacers are definitely one of the most powerful tools you can get. One, because they are relatively cheap. Two, they are very easy to apply. They don't require, you to exercise your feet 20, 30 minutes a day, because we know a lot of people have that kind of boundary where they can't they can or they don't want to put the time into to solving their foot issues. So it's very time and cost effective, and we know through several research studies looking at toe deformities that toe spacers are very effective, and we know this through our extensive experience with working with thousands of people globally that they are extremely effective. So, if you're going to have one tool that you start with, I definitely would recommend toe spacers. And that's something we've had a lot of experience in using and recommending to clients, various types of different ones that exist out there. And we most recently developed our own, which is called the Toe Spacer Kit 2.0, which is essentially a result of kind of research and development through experience using different types of toe spacers and gaining customer feedback from having sold tens of thousands. And we realized that a lot of them have certain quality issues, certain shape issues that make it hard for the user to wear. But apart from that, we've also made sure it comes with a free workshop that guides the user to how you should put them on, how often you should wear them, how you should progress with them, how you can adjust them to better fit your feet, what exercise you can do when using them to minimize any discomfort, etc.
Okay, beautiful. Because I bought toe spacers and I don't think they're wide enough. Like I don't think they actually space my toes wide enough. Like I said
Yeah.
earlier, I have pretty wide feet. So what I started doing
Mm-hmm.
was I was shoving like earplugs and like broke up a pencil just to try to like put in between the toes while I'm wearing the spacers just to widen it even further. But I might need to check out your product. You also alluded to, if someone gets surgery or fixes an issue through exercise, but then they go back to the same lifestyle habits, the problem is going to come back. It's going to persist. So, how important is it to ditch the shoes that are causing the problems? Like, and I'd really like to just ask about footwear. So, are modern shoes destroying our feet, and what are the other options? Like, it doesn't seem to be like there's many options out there for healthy fitting shoes.
Mm-hmm. We believe the root cause of most of the modern foot problems that we see today are shoes, ill-fitted shoes. And this is really nothing new under the sun. I mean, we've dug very deep into the research of this, and we found research dating back to the early 19th century, speaking about the exact same thing we're speaking about today, right? And even then, there are certain shoe developers, like one of the oldest, biggest ones, Clark Shoes from United Kingdom, whose sons actually developed Vivo Barefoot, for example. In any case, they originally had foot-shaped shoes, right? Because they realized these factors. And there's other brands in the States as well that made the Munson boot, which was a foot-shaped military boot, for example, developed through extensive research through military workforce. In any case, we know that shoes are definitely the culprit here, the main culprit. So ditching those shoes is obviously going to be one of the things that you need to do. And this requires a certain mental shift in your perception of also, or a lot of people's perception of what a good looking shoe is. Because as many people experience, as I myself experienced the first time I put these on, I looked down at my feet. I was like, wow, it doesn't look really good. You look like you have dug feet. But that slowly transitioned into my perception being more, wow, I really like the look of these wide foot shaped shoes, and looking at pointed narrow shoes, that just looks so off and so weird. So what it's that kind of norm, what we're used to in society and culture, very easily gets confused with what's natural and what's supposed to be normal. So one of the things is obviously ditching the shoes, and then it's finding the right type of shoe. And it's a jungle out there, definitely. I mean, when I started, there was maybe two or three barefoot shoe brands or functional shoe brands. Now there's over 300 brands globally. So really, they're not that hard to find. If you just Google foot-shaped shoes or functional shoes, you'll find plenty of them. And there's a spectrum of ones that are very, narrower, a lot wider, a lot more foot shaped, less foot shaped, have a thicker or a more minimal sole. And that's where it can become very confusing for a lot of people. Well, which kind of barefoot shoe or functional shoe should I then get? And that is a simple general rule of thumb for listeners is if you don't have any foot pain or major movement related injuries and pains, and you're relatively young, so under the age of 40, 35, then there is generally less risks associated to transitioning into such a shoe, particularly if it's very thin and flexible. Rather than if you do have foot pain, quite severe deformities and are over the age of 45, then or 35, 45, then generally there is slightly higher risks associated to it. The goal is to have everybody transition into foot-shaped wide shoes. And that for us is the non-negotiable, because there's no associated risks for someone going from a narrow toe box to a wide foot-shaped toe box. There are, however, known associated risks for someone going from a heel to toe drop, that elevated heel that you mentioned before, to a zero drop. For example, if you have Achilles tendinopathy or Achilles related pains and issues, that actually may aggravate it. If you have, arthritis in your toe joints, you have these severe toe deformities, you can't bend your toes anymore, then having a thin, flexible sole may actually cause more problems than solve. So having a slightly thicker sole, yet wide in foot shape, may be a better approach for you. So it's to look at, what are the risks, the risk to benefit ratio, depending on which we can gain through understanding the person's history, their injury, and demographic information, age, etc., which are all important in determining what the most appropriate footwear for that person is. In any of those cases, that transition must be done with exercises if you'd like to minimize the risk of injury.
Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like there's a transition that needs to take place to undo the damage over decades. And this is a common theme you see in nutrition and diet as well. Eating the standard American diet for so long, and then people decide to change things up. Transitioning too quickly can cause severe upset sometimes, and so it's better not to push the river and to gradually coax the body into its natural state. So I appreciate your nuance there about there's no one size fits all approach. Again, no pun intended. We have to look at our individual cases. We have to look at our age, how long we've been dealing with this. We have to look at what we've been wearing before, what our feet look like, what our pain levels are, right? So this is all very individualized. But I do
Yes.
appreciate this transitional approach and this gentle approach of like, you don't just want to, wear these super thin shoes if you're an older person with these deformities, because it might cause more pain. It might cause more upset. Like, let's be very careful with this. Okay, let's talk about the exercises, because we talked about footwear and the toe spacers, and there's so many different exercises you can do using elastic bands, just using the muscles of your feet and flexion. There's also pressure points you can do and massage.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we just talked about this is very individualized and nuanced. There's no one size fits all approach. But what are some common exercises that are great to reverse either a bunion or a Taylor's bunion, just to get the toes, back to normal splay, back to alignment?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think in most of my clients' cases, where we always start with is toe alignment, because toe alignment, if your toes are not in their correct position, is going to be very hard for you to use them. Secondly, it's looking at, okay, how flexible are your toes? Are you able to bend through the toes when you're pushing off? By that, I mean, when we're walking, we need to bend through the toes to effectively leverage ourselves to take the next step. And then looking at, are they actually strong enough to cope with those forces? So we do these simple assessments and see, but most people will fail these assessments, because most people, if they have bunions or not, will have some mild degree of toe deformity, that the big toe is pushed in towards the second toe, and so is the fifth toe, which is the world's most common deformity. Then we have varying degrees of hammer toes, where the toes are curled up, which makes it very hard for them to redistribute the weight from the rest of the foot towards the toes when we're trying to load the forefoot. And the toes, they all have direct attachments to the rest of the other bones in the foot. So the midfoot bones, the heel bone, and up through the ankle towards the lower leg bones. So the toes are literally there to steer and stabilize your whole foot and ankle. If we incapacitate them, we lose that control. So the first step in rehabilitating foot function is about realigning and improving strength, mobility, and flexibility of the toes. So if we take a general approach, what we start with most people is...
So right here, the audio started getting weird. It started degrading. So I'm going to take that out and just paraphrase what he was saying. We just went over the importance of alignment of the toes before you do anything. Strength and flexibility being the next two things to develop. Those are part of the assessment to see where you're at. And then after you've likely failed the assessment, like he says most people do, we can start doing some rehabilitation exercises on our own. Or guided. It's up to you. But always keep the alignment principle in mind. There's no point in exercising the toes that are misaligned. You're basically training the body to stay that way. So this is why toe spacers can be a great first step, is that it starts getting the alignment where it should be. Now, what he was about to say is that in general, he has people work on their awareness of the foot. So sit down, take off your socks and shoes, grab your foot in your hands, and play with it. Quite literally play with your feet. Can you wiggle your toes? Can you bend your toes? Can you stretch your toes to the full range of motion? Can you move your toes into a better alignment? Can you splay your toes? Can you put your fingers in between the toes? Find out where is there stiffness, where is there soreness, where is there pain, if any. Are there any balances between the feet? Like, does your right foot have a different shape or ability than the left? These are all huge things to be aware of and will guide our process going forward. So alignment, strength, flexibility, awareness. The next thing he talked about is self-massage. Obviously, you can have a partner or professional massage your feet, but self-massage is easy and free. Basically, when any part of the body is immobilized and doesn't get to move through its full range of motion, the muscles can atrophy, right? If you don't use it, you lose it. So in a lot of cases, when we've been wearing shoes our whole life, a lot of the muscles around the foot and the fascia, which is sort of this outer layer of thin muscle that holds it all in and has beautiful function of its own, get stiff. So we can self-massage to loosen up, break up stiff muscles and scar tissue, right? If you're a skateboarder like me who's continuously injured ankles and feet, we might have some scar tissue built up. And yes, you can break it up. Now, just be careful, obviously. Take it slow, but you can, rub your feet, rub your toes along the tendons, rub the arches, rub your ankles. Can you make the musculature more pliable and less stiff? So after we sit down and play with our feet, become aware, and we give some self-massage, break up some stiffness, we want to work on the active exercises. One of the main things we're shooting for here is disassociation between the big toe and the lesser toes. So instead of thinking about the feet having 5 toes each, which they do, to simplify, you can think about the toes being broken into 2. The big toe, which has its own muscles and tendons, which is the main steering system and driver of the foot. Then you have the lesser toes, the 4 smaller ones, numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5. The lesser toes have a web of fascia that binds those tendons together, so it almost acts as one, the system of the lesser toes. So we want to disassociate the big toe from the lesser toes. How do we do that? Try this. Plant your foot firmly on the ground. You can be seated or stand up as long as your foot is relaxed. Then anchor the big toe down, either with a strap or, underneath the couch, or just with your own muscles in mind. Anchor your big toe down and elevate the lesser toes. Can you do this? How awkward is it? Probably all the toes are going to want to go up together, but we're working on disassociating. Can you anchor your lesser toes down and lift up your big toe? Okay, do they bend and tweak when you do that, or does it stay in alignment? Just be aware and notice everyone's got a different thing going on, but how well can you disassociate? Toe independence. Now, we don't mean independence of each individual toe. You don't need to be able to wiggle just your pinky toe. Breaking them up into two groups, the big toe and the lesser toes, is what Gourgen was really stressing that we need to do. And again, we're trying to do this without twisting and turning the ankle. That's a common compensation technique we do, since we're so not used to controlling our toes with accuracy. Our ankle's going to want to help and compensate. But try to avoid this. He mentioned that there are 33 joints in the foot, 33 places where two bones meet and move. Our foot should have a lot of pliability and mobility, but stuck in shoes all the time, they don't get to be free. So we're relearning how to do that. And congratulations, whoever's listening to this, good job for taking the time to learn about foot health. It's almost taboo in this culture to be seen barefoot, and talking about bunions is not a conversation that is commonly had. So good job to you for just putting yourself in this podcast and seeing what we're discussing. After awareness and massage, the basic exercises. It's going to feel weird at first, but you will get used to it, do it every day, and you'll get pretty good at it pretty quickly. The consistency thing is huge. I've noticed that I could practice something for 5 minutes a day, but if I do it consistently, it will stick better and have longer lasting results than if I did something for an hour a day once a week. And the time of 5 minutes a day for 1 week is less than an hour, the total time. But it's the consistency, the small doses, the baby steps that make long-lasting change. Cool. So those are some of the basic things. Always keep in mind what he said at the beginning, which was alignment, strength, and flexibility. That's what we're going for. If you can strengthen your toes, keep them in line, and make them mobile and flexible, then you're crushing it. All right, back to the interview.
Radical health!
You're actually out there in the field conducting research. And there's one journey that you had. I heard the story you told on a podcast about the shoe effect. And I read the conclusions and the basic write-up of the shoe effect. I don't know if you did a more in-depth publication, but I would like to know more about the shoe effect study. Why did you choose Sri Lanka to do this, and what types of data did you gather when you were there?
So the reason we chose Sri Lanka was because it was logistically very easy to go from the cities where people would be habitually shoe wearing, where, we'd visit hotels, we'd visit different places like gyms, which were where you'd commonly meet people that would wear your traditional kind of shoe wear. And then just 20 minutes outside the city, you can get to the rural areas like the tea plantations, even really in the cities where you'll have the fishermen, where you can easily access people that are barefoot most of the time, if not all the time. And then even just getting to the indigenous tribes in the middle of the jungle is just like a 40 an hour journey, depending obviously what city you're driving from. So logistically speaking, it is the perfect scenario or the perfect location to go do a study where we're looking at different shoe wearing habits, how this affects foot shape across the same ethnic group of people.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you're almost isolating the variable of genetics by looking at one ethnic group of people.
Correct. So this is kind of the reason why we went out or one of the main reasons why we wanted to do this study is because apart from two other studies done similar to this, one in 1905, which is very widely shared across the barefoot community. You've maybe seen those black and gray images of that foot in a shoe, and next to it or the shoes next to the foot, and it's kind of shoe-shaped foot, and then that barefoot, wide-toed foot. That's from a study over 100 years ago by a doctor named Phil Hoffman. And then there's another study done in 2009. I'm going to butcher the author's name, Diout, and colleagues who did a similar study looking at habitually barefoot people in India, comparing this to Dutch. They did have a control group in India as well. But there's too few studies done looking at the same ethnic group. So we wanted to remove the kind of genetic argument, or try and minimize that genetic argument at least, because as we know, within science, you need to kind of do several studies for it to be conclusive. We wanted to get the ball rolling on that. So what we wanted to do is not only look at the same ethnic group, but we're very interested in finding even families and seeing whether shoe wearing habits there had an impact on their feet, which was exactly what we found. One of the ones that stood out most to us was this family of a mother and a father and their three daughters. The mom and dad never, gone to school, been barefoot pretty much their whole lives, perfect feet. The two younger daughters never worn shoes, perfect feet. Then they had the eldest daughter who had started to go to school. And then there they have the traditional British school system, because it's an old British colony where they have the school uniforms and a specific dress shoe. And she already at the age of, I think she's in the young teens, I can't remember, age 14, 15. Now, we didn't include it in the research because you had to be 18 and above, but in any case, we took pictures and documented this. She was the only one that had bunions or started to develop bunions. And we saw this very clearly across different professions of people that would wear certain types of shoes, like police officers. They almost all had deformed feet. And then we can compare this to the fishermen that were always barefoot, and none of them had deformed feet. So we could see this stark difference between people of the same ethnic group, certain wearing shoes, certain not wearing shoes, and you just saw it so clearly night and day. I mean, it's one thing reading about it in studies and believing in the kind of that hypothesis, but seeing it for your own eyes is even more impactful. And we could see it. It's such a clear, distinct difference in the foot shape and health, depending on the types of shoe you wear. So we have the data analyzed, and what we saw was a statistically significant difference in the big toe alignment for people that were shoe wearing compared to people that were habitually barefoot. So pretty much never wore shoes. So none of the people that never wore shoes, so the habitually barefoot group, none of them had bunions. None. They were all within the range of what you'd classify as normal alignment. And that range, so you'd measure big toe alignment using degrees relative to where it's supposed to be. So plus 15 degrees and above is classified as having a misalignment or bunions. And then you have hallux varus as opposed to hallux valgus, which is the clinical term for bunions, is where the big toe is pointing in the opposite direction. So it's flaring out from the other toes, which we saw sometimes in barefoot people. And those people were those that would be climbing trees. And you see this in certain Amazon tribes as well, where the big toes really flared out because they're adapt to climbing trees to pick coconuts. So with the data analyzed, we saw a statistical significant difference, a strong correlation between shoe wearing and these deformities, and within the same ethnic group. And unfortunately, in the science data, we can't use the family and the more genetically closer groups because it was not only that mother and father and three daughters, but we saw several families where they had different shoe wearing habits, and we could clearly see this difference as well.
Wow. So I'm thinking about the types of data that you were gathering. One, you're talking about the angle of the HVA, the hallux valgus angle.
Correct.
Were you also collecting data on arches? What else were you collecting besides that angle?
So we had a 3D scanner with us from our partner Volumental, who supply 3D scanners for shoe stores globally. And they can very accurately measure with this 3D scanner the different dimensions of the foot, including the HVA angle, so the angle of the big toe. So that's what we use to measure that. We also had our plantar pressure plate with us, which is this flat plate with sensors. So when you stand on it, it gives you a digital image of your pressure distribution under your foot. So it's kind of like a heat map where you'll have color. Warmer colors would signify higher pressure, colder colors, lower pressure. And you could also see the peak pressure through like this cross that's imaged. So we gathered that data as well. But unfortunately, we won't be using that in the study because what we did not have, unfortunately, is a scientific software with that plantar pressure plate. We tried to collaborate with these plantar pressure plate companies to have them sponsor us for this study, but unfortunately they were unwilling, so we're unable to use that data, but we have it as own research, I guess you'd say. And we saw some amazing things there as well. And that's where, for example, we could see those people that had healthy, natural feet, that peak pressure would almost always easily land on the big toe, especially when they would have their body weight shifted towards the forefoot. Whereas people that were shoe wearing and had these deformed feet, when their center of mass, so when their body weight shifted towards the forefoot, that peak pressure would go towards the toe joints, like the big toe joint, for example, right? Or the fifth toe joint. And this is exactly how bunions or bunionets develop. That toe gets out of misalignment and then it's no longer able to redistribute those peak forces through further towards the toe itself. It gets concentrated in the toe joints. So that's one stark difference we saw, and the ones that had healthier feet had better, distribution of force across the whole foot. One other thing we did through the questionnaire we were also using was to look at regional foot pain. So whether they had pain in in different parts of the foot. Now that data is still being gathered. And we will hopefully publish the study by the end of this year and can present that data as well. But the data that's already been analyzed and extracted is with the HVA angles, which is the one that we can present out already.
Beautiful. And that seems to be like the most pressing and obviously glaring, data that we can look at and say, this is a clear foot deformation and it's clearly linked to wearing shoes. So
Correct.
That's really interesting. You said healthy feet puts most pressure on the big toe, kind of on the inside of the foot. Is that what you said?
So imagine your big toe, the tip of the big toe, or like the majority of that, the big toe itself. When people would lean forward, so when your body weight would come towards the forward half of your foot. So if you're just standing and you just kind of lean forward, your pressure goes towards the forefoot. In healthy footed individuals, the peak pressure, so most of the pressure would always go to that big toe.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, whereas people that had deformed feet, that peak pressure wouldn't go to the big toe; it'd go to the toe joints. So meaning that you're overloading the toe joints rather than using your toes to catch that weight or to catch that force. And this is what we see in, we have a clinic studio in Sweden, and we do these assessments on a regular basis. I've done this for many years, and we see this constantly. But here, it's very rare to see someone be able to actually use their big toe or use their toes, whereas there it was very common. Naturally, instinctively, they would just be using their toes. And visually, another really cool thing we saw that, just when people were walking, we saw, this lady, she must have been in her 70s, perfect feet. And when we saw her walking, as that foot left the ground, that big toe would kind of flare out. It would abduct. So it would move away from that second toe in preparation to impact the floor with a wide base of support to control that motion. We never see this. Very rarely do we ever see this in Sweden or in modern societies and cultures, but we saw that over and over again. These people that didn't wear shoes, that their toes would just splay beautifully right when that foot was leaving the ground, right before impact. But most of the feet of our feet and people in shoe wearing cultures, the toes don't even move as soon as that foot leaves the ground, let alone strike the ground.
Okay, very, very interesting. And thank you for clarifying that. I definitely see now what you're saying, where the shoe wearers will put the pressure as they lean forward on the toe joint, whereas the toe itself is stronger in the non-shoe wearing cultures or individuals. Now,
Hmm.
this kind of begs the question to me, like, are shoes even necessary? Because I know in my country, in America, like Native Americans, there's some tribes that never wore shoes. They have extremely widely splayed toes, really strong feet. They live in the Florida Everglades, which is, it's known to be rough terrain. There's snakes, there's alligators, there's, spiders. And when the Westerners offered them shoes, they completely refused them. So this just begs the question in my mind, and I want to know what you think about this. Are shoes even necessary for humans?
I think shoes are necessary for humans. It's one of the reasons why we as a species have been able to expand globally because our feet are relatively sensitive if you compare it to other animals, right? So if you compare it to, a horse, for example, or any other kind of four-legged animal, they have hooves, for example, right, that
Mm,
naturally protect. Our feet, relatively speaking, are quite sensitive, particularly to puncture damage, right, sharp objects, but also to temperature, right. So the reason why we're able to colonize the Arctic regions, or certain places that would otherwise be inhospitable, is because we've had the brain capacity to be able to develop something to protect our feet from the elements. But when looking at these shoes for, way back into history, they were usually made of just leather and moccasin designed to the shape of your foot with minimal kind of support. It was essentially no support. It's just a piece of cloth around your foot to insulate the foot, right, from temperature. And then certain other cultures that would put a bit more under the foot if it's like, so for example, the Tarahumara Indians in the Copper Canyons in Mexico are very known thanks to the book Born to Run. I'm not sure if you've read that book, but um, a reporter, Christopher McDougall, he traveled out there to go running with them because they're known for running in really rough terrain as well in sandals they make out of old car tires. So these sandals, they don't restrict the position of the toes, and they're known to run barefooted or essentially barefooted in these sandals for long distances in very rough terrain, essentially injury free. Um, so I do think we need shoes, but it's the shape of the shoe that is the most important thing. And if you're in a climate where you don't necessarily need shoes, then you won't need shoes, and the environment will dictate that really. So if you want to go barefoot and the environment allows that, then why not? If you can do it um, without the risk of injury through other objects on the ground, and if you don't mind being stared at in public, which people will tend to do if you're going barefoot.
yeah, I like that answer. Does depend on the environment, I think, and shoes can elevate our human experience.
Hmm.
And you live in Sweden, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so obviously you're going to need a little bit more protection from the elements than
Yeah.
me, who I live in Miami, Florida, which is right on the Tropic of Cancer, and so
Hmm.
it's almost tropical here. It's subtropical, and I do live most of the day without shoes. Now,
Hmm.
when I go into the grocery store, if they even let me be barefoot, I don't like to do that because it doesn't feel good. The ground is really cold. There's
Hmm.
all sorts of, it's just dirty. Um, who knows what kind of things have been dripping on the ground, and it doesn't feel good on my feet to be walking on really hard, smooth tile. So
Hmm.
there's times where I choose to wear shoes because it's just more comfortable. But for the most
Hmm.
part, if I'm outside, even on really rough terrain, on rocky gravel, like I enjoy being barefoot. So I think maybe to find the happy medium is we just got to find the right footwear. We got to find the footwear that doesn't constrict our mobility. It doesn't push our toes toward each other, deforming the entire shape of the foot. We also need shoes that maybe don't have a huge drop or any drop. And you know what? Here's another question a lot of people have is about arches.
Hmm.
What about arch support and flat-footed people? Can you talk a little bit about, is that reversible, flat feet? My understanding is that the arch is a bit of a shock absorber, and that it's healthy to have an arch. So, but I don't know too much about this. I've been looking more at the toes, and the bunions. So could you take a second and just talk about arches and maybe how to develop good arch health?
Sure. So first of all, there is an important distinction there with the term being flat-footed, because you can have acquired flat foot, which is something that you can develop through foot deformities. And this is developed primarily through the misalignment of the big toe, because the big toe has a direct attachment to the heel bone and indirectly through the midfoot bones. So the big toe and the other toes, mind you, will directly impact your ability to form an arch and also to decelerate, or to rather control the drop of the arch. So when you lose toe control and strength, your arch will naturally collapse, or in certain other individuals, such as soccer players or people that are constantly in this push-off position, the foot kind of makes itself rigid in this high arch shape, so that you can still at least use your foot as a rigid lever. But in any case, your arch should be able to depress and move up again. So what we call untwisting and twisting. Because the arch, you can see the arch is kind of like a twisted plate, because the body is a vertical structure, right? And the foot is a more planar, is a plane structure. So at some point, that structure needs to twist in from that vertical structure into a flat structure, and that's what the arch does. And this is unique to humans compared to other primates. We've developed the arch because we're bipedal. We stand and walk and run on 2 feet, and we need the ability to absorb that shock, but also to adapt to variable terrain. So you have going back, acquired flat foot that's acquired through inappropriate footwear and the weakening of the toes, and then you have congenital flat foot, what you're born with, which is not necessarily a bad thing. You can still have a wide foot with healthy, strong toes and just generally have a lower arch. And you can have a healthy foot with a higher arch. These are just genetic differences, much like people that are born shorter or taller. Certain people have longer limbs or shorter limbs, larger rib cages, narrower hips, etc. Right? These are just genetic differences, which we can see in different ethnic groups, and they doesn't necessarily mean it's unhealthy or a bad thing, right? So where this is a misconception of trying to define foot health through arch height. It's not as simple as that. We need to look at, are you able to control the motions of the arch through the use of your toes or not? That is the most important distinction and function there when it comes to the arch. And when we're talking about orthotics, or the use of insoles or arch support, that was developed through the 60s and through the late 60s, when they did a study and they were able to correlate overpronation, so people that would roll inaccessibly with their feet, to injuries. So they started to research on certain orthotic devices that can fix the posture of the foot, so it would rest in a more so-called neutral position. But through the decades now, when we've done extensive research on orthotics, and particularly in acquired flat foot in adults, there is no conclusive research. So there's a lot of research showing that it does help, and there's just as much research showing it doesn't help, right? So there's no conclusion. So it's somewhat surprising that is one of the only things that you're recommended if you go to a podiatrist, that, oh, you got to have arch support, you got to live with this, you should never go barefoot, is a very common thing that people will be told, when there is no conclusive research to actually show this. And there's actually research coming out now to show that foot exercises, along with toe spaces, etc., actually is more effective in improving your arch stiffness, your arch height and control and stability, as opposed to using orthotics. Because orthotics is a passive means of support. They're essentially like crutches. They passively support the foot. They also immobilize the foot. When you immobilize the foot, you no longer get the stimulation through the muscles, because you're not stretching the joints and essentially the muscles to stimulate them to adapt and to grow stronger. So what we see through overuse of orthotics is the atrophy of foot muscles. So there's I'm not saying that orthotics are only bad. That's also an important distinction to make, because they do have their time and place, and they're very helpful when people are suffering from acute injury and pain in supporting that part, just like crutches, so you can offload and heal. But then you need to go into a transition of rehabilitation through exercises to regain your ability to cope with those forces without those crutches.
Beautiful. I love the nuanced answer you gave about the arches. I can also visualize what you're saying about the verticality and the horizontality. I forget the exact terms you used of the foot with your twisted plate diagram. I'm looking at it here on Instagram. If people are listening, you can go to my foot function, and there's a great diagram about the twisted plate theory where our foot is at once a vertical instrument and a horizontal instrument. And you have a tool, right, to sort of regain the mobility. And so is that the pedis board, and does that help regain arch strength?
Correct. Yes. So the twisted plate theory is actually taken from a study done, and I apologize to the author of that study. I failed to remember his name, but all credit to him. It is taken from a study where he discusses the foot as a twisted plate. But in any case, the pedis board has been designed to target the arch in that manner because the motions what we call pronation, where the foot arch depresses, and supination, where the foot arch raises itself, is essentially, if you imagine that twisted plate, you're untwisting it. So when you untwist it, that plate flattens out. So i.e. the arch flattens out, and you can twist it again so that the plate, forms this arch. And, if you imagine you holding a plate with two hands, to be able to twist and untwist that plate, you have to twist the two ends in opposite directions, right? So
Yeah.
this is why we've developed that pedis board, is to be able to twist the heel or the rear foot in an opposite direction to the forefoot. And this is how you start increasing torque and increasing motion through the midfoot to effectively improve your ability to either, if you have a very rigid foot, to mobilize the arch, or if you have a acquired flat foot, to make the arch more rigid again, or to be able to twist that arch up again. And we can use it for, essentially, in my opinion, through using it for many years, it's one of the most multifunctional foot training tools out there. It's because not only does it uniquely target that part of the foot, but we can, through positioning the legs underneath the board, we can use it to, for example, place the toes in an upward bent position when we're doing a heel raise exercise, which preloads the flexor muscles of the foot. So you're loading the intrinsic muscles of the foot more as opposed to the calf. If you'd be doing a heel raise, you can make the forefoot board unstable relative to the heel, standing on one leg, to improve your ability to control and stabilize the foot. And many other exercises that you can do. And it comes with a free workshop to teach and educate people on how to use this and how to target exercises based on what kind of foot you have.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that we're digging deep into the mechanics of the foot, learning how it moves. It's actually a beautiful instrument. It's a beautiful machine, the
Mm-hmm.
foot. Whereas, most people probably imagine it as like a one chunk, like a club. You just throw it in the shoe, you kick around, you can walk, you can do your basic stuff, but there's so much independence with the toes, the forefoot, the midfoot, the heel, the arches. Like, I always like to kind of play with the idea of, is the human body a design, or is it an evolution or an adaptation? Either way, it's a beautiful, beautiful design, or excuse me, it's a beautiful piece of equipment. It's a beautiful machine that
I
I'm glad
agree,
we're
absolutely.
starting to learn about how it actually works.
Yeah, I think even Leonardo da Vinci, one of his quotes are, "The foot is a marvel of engineering," because he obviously studied a lot of anatomy, and he was also very fascinated by how the foot is very unique compared to other parts of the body, with its multifaceted joints and the amount of muscles and the complexity to the foot compared to many other parts of the body.
Yes, because after all, it is the foundation. Everything starts
Hmm.
there. All of our weight rests on the foot. All of our mobility rests on the health and the function of our feet.
Hmm.
So this is very serious. Now, this also begs the question: why are foot doctors and shoemakers oblivious to all this stuff? It really baffles my mind that shoes don't fit. Like, why do the biggest shoe companies create shoes that give humans bunions? Like, can you help me understand why this is even happening in the world?
I think that's a very important question. So thank you for asking that. And I think it helps. So let's start in the history of shoes and kind of the origin of the pointed shoe, right? So and it also leads back to what we are talking about before in terms of deformities. So one of the earliest kind of pointed shoes, these narrow shoes, were found in the early medieval ages, right? So that'd be a period spanning between circa 500 AD to about 1500 AD, which is also known as the Dark Ages during that time, where there was kind of a decline in scientific development due to the increase in power of certain religious entities, and etc. And what we saw then was shoes were primarily used by people that were of a higher social standing, right? So people back then, had brains as well. So they could know if they saw you with these ridiculously pointed, narrow shoes, they could see and realize, okay, that can't be comfortable. You can't walk around very far with those types of shoes. So they'd be like, aha, okay, you don't have to be out on the farms doing manual labor to make a living. You must be wealthy, right? So shoes is a way for human beings to showcase their standing in the social hierarchy. And this has been shown across human culture in various different ways, and not only shoes, right? In certain other cultures, in Africa, for example, certain women will place rings around their necks to elongate the neck. You'd have, the corsets in the Victorian ages to have that very narrow waist. Certain cultures would even elongate the neck, an extreme form of foot binding from China, lotus foot binding, where they'd crush the feet when you're a baby to form it into these really, really tiny feet. So, all these, there's kind of what you call fashion and deformity. And there's a very interesting book that was written in the 18th, I think 19th century, which is called literally Fashion and Deformity. I forget the author's name again, but he delved deep and investigated this kind of cultural behavior in human beings, where we try and showcase our social standing in the social hierarchy through deformity, right? And fashion, so it's essentially fashion, right? Because fashion is a way to showcase your standing in the social hierarchy. So it's, and a lot of these practices we've moved away from because we've realized we've deemed them to be unhealthy for us. But for some reason, we're still deforming our feet in this way, right? And it's just a showcase of fashion. There's no functional purpose to it whatsoever. And to your question about the shoe industry, so when shoes started to be mass produced in the 18th century, one of the most expensive aspects of shoe development is creating the shoe last and the mold. And if you have an asymmetrical mold, you'll need two for the left foot and the right foot, so a foot-shaped mold, which would be more expensive. But if you have a symmetrical shoe last, so similar left and right, you can just have one mold for the left and right, so it's cheaper to develop. So that's one other factor apart from the fashion factor, which has led to the prominence of these types of shoes. And what as I mentioned before as well, what the cultural norm is very easily confused to be what is natural as well. So this is kind of, and especially if you see doctors, physiotherapists, podiatrists wearing these kind of shoes, who you look for and trust for these kind of professional advice in terms of your health, and they're wearing these kind of shoes, you don't question it anymore, right? And if everyone's wearing it, you stop questioning it. The crazy part is Nike, Reebok, all these major shoe brands, they know all of this. They have done the research. They know this, right? But demands that, so we essentially demand that type of shoe. So as much as our fault as it is the shoe company's fault, they know all this through their research. They know what the narrow pointed toe box does to foot health and foot shape. So they're not oblivious to it. They just know that it's not popular. People won't buy it as much, right? Because people are just not used to it. So this is where education comes in, and this is why we're so passionate about doing what we do. We're trying to educate people so they realize the ridiculousness of what we're doing to our feet.
Yeah, it definitely is ridiculous. But what you said is hopeful in a way. If the shoe companies are operating based on demand, then we can create a demand for well-fitting shoes.
Correct. Yeah.
If we stop buying shoes that give us bunions and say, yo, we want wide toe box shoes, I'm starting to put all the skate shoe brands on blast. I'm like,
Hmm.
hey, make some wide toe box shoes and I will buy them. You'll make more money from me because if you just create things that don't hurt me. And think about it, skateboarders, it's all about the feet. They
Hmm.
jumping constantly, they're flicking, they're doing these technical
Hmm.
movements and catching a board with their feet. But then the shoe has to be very protective because we're also jumping down things and getting hurt and rolling our ankles all the time. So I hear a couple things. I hear we need to create a demand for wide toe box shoes, barefoot style, and maybe they'll listen. Money talks.
Hmm. No, exactly. And then this is where, again, education comes in, because the vast majority of people globally still are oblivious to this. And health professionals are oblivious to this as well. And this is just purely because, if we're wondering why podiatrists don't commonly talk about this, etc., it's because their education is based on the research that exists, right? And a lot of the research done through the late 60s, 70s were particularly on orthotics and how we can stabilize the foot using these. So their education is naturally going to be based on orthotics in treating different types of foot postural faults. But we have enough research to show that a narrow toe box is really bad for the foot. It's just that there's not enough there. And the more current research coming out, it takes about 10, 20 years before that is applied practically in educations. But fortunately, there's a lot of professionals and very good podiatrists waking up to this fact and, and preaching and teaching about this as well.
I love it. We're going to make function fashionable again, right? Because
Yeah,
now I
exactly.
can see someone super skinny, pointy shoes and think, you're hurting yourself. Like, that's not even fashionable to me. I don't think that's beautiful.
No,
What
exactly.
I think we're entering a paradigm shift where health is beautiful, where perfect function of the human body is what we all are going to want to naturally strive for. So
Hmm.
I'm here for it. You're here for it. I really appreciate the work you're doing to help spread this information. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your website and some of the services and products that you offer in case people want to, take this more seriously, follow up, and do some work to, make an investment to their health, to their foot health.
Thank you, Seth. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I really appreciate you having this platform to share this information with everybody. So on our website, so apart from our Instagram, obviously, where we share a wealth of information, which is free, we have a website as well where we have a wealth of free information through blog posts and through our app, Foot Function. Not My Foot Function, but just Foot Function, which is downloadable on iOS or Google Play. There's a lot of good free information there as well. But what we've developed is a series of different online workshops. So on-demand workshops are pre-recorded, where you can learn about all of this and where we are empowering people to take control of their foot health by educating them in how to assess their feet, how to assess their shoes, and then based on this and their background, what exercise they need to do. So one of our most popular workshops is called Fix Your Feet, and you can buy this with certain with our tools as well, which is the starter bundle. It's called, where you get the Fix Your Feet workshop and you get the most essential tools like the toe spacers, the foot training bands, our massage tools, etc. Where you can start on this journey of discovering your feet and then restoring your foot health and function. And then we have some more specific workshops that are targeted at specific foot problems, such as plantar fasciopathy or bunions or what's it called, metatarsologia or Morton's neuroma, etc. So, and these also you can choose as standalone workshops. So a lot of the exercise you can do without tools, and we have chapters within the workshops that you can perform with tools for progression as well. So we try and make it as accessible for people as possible. So you can buy and access these workshops directly through our app as well.
Right on. So you guys are here on the forefront of this type of research, this this movement toward realigning our feet, realigning our foundation, getting back to foot health. It doesn't seem like you guys are selling snake oil either. There's a lot of in the health space. There's a lot of people selling all these products that claim to cure this or that, but your stuff's based on research that works, and it empowers the user and the individual to take back their own health. And
Yeah,
ideally, once we get some of your products and some of your information, we won't need your help anymore, right? Because it's back in our control,
that's the
and
goal.
we're right. So, but that's kind of counter to what most doctors and health workers, how they operate. They want you to come back year after year after year. It's all about the money. But here, yeah, we're all about the health. Gourgen
Yeah,
Gevorgyan. Anything else you want to share?
No, I was just going to quickly mention that, I believe if you provide something that truly helps people, you can still make a good living off of that as well, and be truthful and honest and provide high quality and good information to people, which genuinely helps them. Then there isn't any reason why you shouldn't be able. There's enough people on this planet to make a living off being honest in what you're providing as well.
Beautiful. I love it. I thank you for being with us today. Thanks for your time, sharing this information. I feel like I'm going to have to listen to this a couple times to really get the some of the terminology down. We're not used. If you're not like a physiologist, some of these terms can be confusing about the pronation, the supination. So I think there's a little work we have to do to even. I speak for the layman here. I put myself in that category. We have to do some work just to understand these terms, and then do some work to understand our feet. Do some work to realign things. But I think the listeners of my show and this show they want to do the work. Like, we're about it. We want to take responsibility. That's what the show is all about, is that health is not something that we outsource. We can have teachers and we can have our mentors and people opening doors, but we got to walk through it. So once again, Gourgen, I thank you for being on the show, sharing your information. For everybody listening, check out myfootfunction.com, and they might be able to help you out. And thanks again, Gourgen. I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Seth. I'd just like to also mention quickly, if it's okay with you, that all your listeners at Radical Health, we want to offer a discount. So if you use Radical Health as a coupon code when you check out on our store at myfootfunction.com, you're welcome to use that discount on any order that you place with us. So thank you so much for hosting me and for the brilliant conversation. It was an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to more conversations with you, hopefully in the future, Seth.
Thank you so much. And just to be clear, it's Radical Health, one word, put a space in there. Does it matter?
Radical Health, one word, no capitals, just Radical Health, one word.
Well, thank you so much. Much appreciated. And yeah, we'll talk again soon. Thanks again, Gourgen.
Thank you, Seth.
Radical Health.
Foot health, baby. It's the new wave. Get on it. That was a really fascinating discussion with Gourgen. I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. I'd love to have him back on to discuss some deeper topics. We could have a whole conversation on the ankle, on fascia, on the rest of the skeletal structure, and on barefoot shoes. We didn't go too deep into that topic, but I really want to be focused on solutions moving forward and not just pointing out the issues. So you may hear more foot conversations in the future. That's great of him to offer all the listeners a discount code on myfootfunction.com. The checkout code would be Radical Health. And no, I'm not sponsored by his company. I'm just promoting what I think works and what I find value in. So I'm not getting paid a penny from his products or this podcast, to be honest with you. I put this out just for the information that I feel needs to get out. I think this occulted information about health is so needed and wanted in this world. And what does occulted mean? Occultare is a Latin word meaning hidden from view. So when you hear the word the occult, it doesn't always mean witches and magic and stuff like that. It's just things that are hidden, things that are esoteric. And I do consider foot health to be a cult because no one's really talking about it in the public. Everyone's wearing their expensive shoes that are deforming their feet and loving them. Using shoes as a symbol of social status. Anyways, hope you guys dug it. Stay tuned for next week's episode. It's going to be a recap of the Texas Fruit Fest. As always, go to sethbailin.com if you want to see, read, and listen to more of my work. There's a lot of music and videos out there. And on the library page, there are a lot of PDFs of my notes, zines, and books that you can download for free. You can buy The Fruit Companion in paperback form or PDF. We're coming up on 1 year since The Fruit Companion has been released, and I've just been blown away by the feedback and the amount of people who have bought this book and let me know how much it helps them. I wrote the book to, again, bring some occulted information to the forefront. We were not taught how to eat fruit. We weren't taught how to appreciate the diversity of fruit. And I'm speaking for, an American culture. I'm not sure what it's like everywhere else, but I can imagine, since the American culture has been brought around the world, that it's like this in many places, that we're brought up eating grains, animal products, oil, salty things, primarily, and eating fruits as a snack in between, or as a little garnish on the plate to give it more color. Well, with the Fruit Companion and with just the knowledge of nature, we can start appreciating these fruits as whole meals. And once I did that, a lot of my health issues went away. I had asthma and suffered from anxiety all the time, and those are gone simply by changing what I eat for breakfast and lunch from animal-based foods to fruit. Anyways, y'all, thanks for listening. Stay tuned. Much love. Free the feet. As always, none of this is medical advice. None of this is intended to diagnose, cure, or prevent any type of ailment or dis-ease. Please consult your physician before making any changes to your lifestyle. All ideas presented on this show are for informational and entertainment purposes only.